the galactic transit hub of Epsilon Tertius, processed approximately 14 million travelers per standard cycle, which was impressive considering that half the species passing through couldn't even breathe the same atmospheric composition. The station existed in that peculiar state of organized chaos that only truly massive infrastructure projects could achieve, where everything was simultaneously falling apart and working perfectly. It had been operating for 372 years, without a single catastrophic failure, which the administrators liked to mention roughly every 47 seconds in their promotional materials. The security checkpoint at Terminal 7 had seen literally everything. Crystalline beings who communicated through light refraction, gaseous entities contained in elaborate magnetic bottles, that one time a species made entirely of coordinated fungal networks, tried to argue they should only pay one fare since they were technically a single organism. The security officers had processed them all with the kind of weary professionalism that comes from working a job where weird lost all meaning, approximately 3 centuries ago, which made the current situation notably bizarre. The human woman approaching Checkpoint 7 Alpha looked aggressively unremarkable, average height by human standards, which meant slightly short compared to most galactic species, wearing what the cultural database identified as casual travel attire, which apparently meant soft fabric pants and a loose upper garment with some kind of faded graphic on it. She carried a single bag, walked with the slightly glazed expression of someone who'd been traveling too long, and had already pulled out her identification documents before reaching the scanner. She looked about as threatening as a decorative pillow. The AI disagreed rather enthusiastically. Apex 7, the station's pride and joy, the artificial intelligence system that had successfully identified 3 actual terrorist plots and 1 accidentally dangerous shipment of volatile fungi, suddenly lit up like a supernova at a fireworks convention. Every screen in the checkpoint area flashed through a rainbow of warning colors that the designers had apparently included for apocalyptic scenarios they'd never actually expected to encounter. The lead security officer of Exanali, whose name translated roughly to properly paranoid about procedural protocols but who went by properly, froze with all 6 of his appendages locked in confusion. His compound eyes, usually excellent at processing multiple threat vectors simultaneously, simply couldn't reconcile what he was seeing. The human looked like she could barely threaten a sandwich. The AI was suggesting they evacuate the entire terminal. Said properly, demonstrating the linguistic sophistication that comes with complete cognitive dissonance. Could you step aside, please? The human blinked at him with that peculiar expression humans got when confronted with bureaucratic absurdity. Is there a problem? Approximately 47 alarms were currently screaming for attention. The threat assessment had gone from green to a color that properly didn't think existed in standard warning protocols. 2 of his junior officers, both from the crystalline FX species who communicated through harmonic resonance, were literally vibrating with distress. The system has flagged you as high risk, properly managed. Trying to maintain professional composure while his panic glands secreted enough anxiety hormones to make his carapace itch. This is highly unusual. I'm going to need you to remain calm and not make any sudden movements. The human's eyebrows rose. Humans did that a lot, apparently. They had remarkably mobile faces for species that didn't use chromatophores or antenna positioning for expression. I'm just trying to catch my connecting flight to the mining colonies. Yes, properly gestured with 3 appendages while the other 3 attempted to interface with the security console. The artificial intelligence system suggests you may be carrying something extremely dangerous. The woman patted her pockets in that universal gesture of checking for forgotten items. I've got my data pad, my identification, some snacks for the flight, and every alarm in the terminal immediately escalated to a new level of hysterical urgency. Whatever she'd just mentioned had made things exponentially worse. Please stop talking, properly said, his voice climbing into frequencies that human ears probably couldn't detect. Please stop moving. Please consider existing less intensely for a moment while I figure out what's happening. Behind him, one of the FX officers chimed something that roughly translated to, "Did the human just admit to carrying a weapon?" While the other responded with, "I think she said snacks, but the AI seems to think those are the same thing." The security console was now displaying threat assessments in 17 different languages simultaneously, including 3 that properly didn't think were meant for his security clearance level. Numbers scrolled past too quickly to read, but he caught fragments: catastrophic contamination potential, biological warfare concern, unprecedented danger classification, and most disturbingly consider immediate spacing. Ma'am, properly said, attempting to use the human term for respectful address, while his entire cardiovascular system attempted to exit through his carapace. I'm going to need you to very slowly place your bag on the ground and step back approximately 5 standard units. The human complied, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who dealt with confused authority figures before. She set down her bag like it contained delicate electronics rather than whatever eldritch horror the AI had detected. Properly extended a manipulator arm to scan the bag from a safe distance. The scanner, a top-of-the-line model that could detect weapons, explosives, dangerous pathogens, or unauthorized livestock, promptly experienced what could only be described as a nervous break. The readout flickered between so many warning states that it started inventing new ones. How? Properly asked, his translator struggling with the high-pitched wheeze his voice had become. Are you carrying something that reads as simultaneously alive, dead, hostile, benign, organic, synthetic, dangerous, and somehow registered as 17 different classes of prohibited material? The human looked at her bag, she looked at Properly, she looked at the cascade of alarms turning the checkpoint into a disco of disaster warning. I literally have no idea what you're talking about, she said with the patience of someone who'd been through 14 security checkpoints already and had stopped being surprised by anything. It's just my stuff. A senior administrator appeared at a dead sprint, which was impressive considering the species had 4 legs and moved like a cross between a deer and a nervous breakdown. What's the situation? Human, Properly said, which apparently explained everything. The administrator's ear analogues flattened against their skull. Oh, fantastic. Did we remember to update the human screening protocols after the last incident? What last incident? Exactly. The human raised one hand slightly, making everyone in a 12-meter radius. Can someone please tell me what's going on? I'm going to miss my connection. Properly looked at the apocalyptic light show his console had become. He looked at the small, tired-looking human who appeared roughly as dangerous as a moderately depressed houseplant. He looked at the AI system, which had apparently decided that its entire purpose was to scream about this one individual. Ma'am, he said, reaching for whatever remained of his professional training. I'm going to need you to come with us to a secure interrogation facility while we determine exactly why our most advanced artificial intelligence thinks you're a goddamn bum. The human sighed the deep sigh of someone whose day had just gotten significantly longer. Is this going to take long? Because I really need to make that connection. The console behind Properly spontaneously escalated 3 more alert levels, which shouldn't have been mathematically possible. That, he said, remains to be seen. The high-security interrogation chamber existed in a state of technological overkill that would have impressed paranoid dictators across 17 star systems. 4-inch thick transparent aluminum wall, atmospheric controls that could shift between 60 different environmental compositions in under 3 seconds. Scanning equipment that could theoretically detect a dangerous thought if someone concentrated hard enough. The whole room hummed with the kind of excessive caution that came from 3 centuries of dealing with species who considered personal space a suggestion and biological containment more of a guideline. The human sat in the center of it all, looking substantially less impressed than the architects had intended. This seems excessive, she observed, watching as another scanning array descended from the ceiling with all the menacing grace of a very concerned mechanical spider. Across the reinforced observation barrier, head of security Yuvan Kal preened his feathers in that distinctive pattern that meant he was mentally composing the incident report and already hating every word. Avian species made excellent security chiefs because they had the natural paranoia of creatures who'd evolved watching for predators from every direction. Yuvan Kal had taken this evolutionary advantage and weaponized it into a career of magnificent suspicion. Protocol is protocol, he chirped, his translator rendering the clicking sounds into standard galactic common. When Apex 7 registers a threat level of that magnitude, we don't take chances. The AI thinks I'm dangerous because I have The AI thinks you're dangerous because you are dangerous. We just don't know why yet. Another technician entered the observation area, manipulating a hovering console with 3 of her 6 tentacles, while the others held various scanning devices. Her species, the Fenderi, were amphibious and naturally anxious, which made them either perfect or terrible for technical diagnostics depending on who you asked. Status, Yuvan Kal demanded. Confusing, the technician burbled, her translator adding a note of distress that probably wasn't necessary given how her chromatophores were flashing through panic colors. Every scan produces results that contradict the previous scan. She registers as carrying biological agents, but they're not classified as weapons. She has chemical compounds that our database marks as both toxic and nutritional. There's something in her bag producing electromagnetic signatures, consistent with either communications equipment or a very small star-going supernova. The human waved slightly from inside the chamber. That's probably my datapad. It needs charging. A datapad should not produce those readings, the technician insisted, her tentacles knotting together in the Fenderi equivalent of wringing one's hands. Nothing should produce those readings unless it's actively trying to achieve sentience or explode. Possibly both. Uvenkal's head swiveled in that unnerving way that reminded everyone that avian species could see in directions that made other species uncomfortable. Run a historical analysis. Check the database for previous human encounters that triggered similar responses. The technician's tentacles flew across her console, pulling up files that made her turn 3 different shades of distressed purple. Oh no. Oh, this is bad. There was an incident at Station 47, where a human brought something called yogurt through security. What happened? They evacuated 6 terminals and called in a bioweapon response team. Turns out it was fermented dairy products with live bacterial cultures. The human insisted it was a health food. Uvenkal's feathers ruffled. Live bacteria. They eat live bacteria. Apparently it helps with something called digestion. The technician pulled up another file, her color shifting toward horrified green. There's another incident. Human tried to bring kimchi through agricultural inspection. The scanner identified it as hostile organic matter in an active state of decomposition. Was it? Technically yes. But humans also eat that. On purpose. For pleasure. Inside the interrogation chamber, the human had pulled out her datapad, despite probably not being supposed to, and was scrolling through something with the patient boredom of someone waiting in a very strange doctor's office. Every scanner in the room continued having what could only be described as an existential crisis about her existence. Let me understand this, Uvenkal said slowly, his translator struggling with the frequency his voice had achieved. Humans routinely consume controlled decay. It gets worse. The technician pulled up the biological database, and her entire body flushed with the kind of color usually reserved for discovering your spacecraft was leaking atmosphere. According to this, human digestive systems contain approximately 40 trillion bacterial organisms at any given time. That's more bacteria than there are human cells in their bodies. The observation room went very quiet except for the humming of overtaxed scanning equipment. They're walking bacterial colonies, properly said from the corner, where he'd been watching with the grim satisfaction of someone whose paranoia had been validated. Every single one of them is carrying enough microorganisms to populate a small moon. The bacteria aren't invasive, the technician clarified, though her color suggested she wasn't particularly comforted by this fact. They're symbiotic, required for survival actually, but from a scanner's perspective, every human is essentially a traveling ecosystem. Uvenkal stared at the human through the transparent barrier. She'd gotten bored with her datapad, and was now examining her fingernails with the kind of attention that suggested she was considering whether she needed to trim them. She looked so fundamentally harmless, that his brain was having difficulty processing the technical data. So Apex 7 isn't malfunctioning, he said finally. No sir, it's working perfectly. It's detecting exactly what it's supposed to detect. It's just that humans apparently qualify as biological anomalies that happen to be sentient. Fantastic. The human looked up suddenly and made eye contact through the barrier, despite probably not being able to see through the one-way transparency. Humans had decent eyesight, though nothing spectacular by galactic standards, but they had this unnerving ability to know when they were being watched. She mouthed something that the visual interpreter translated as, "Can I go now?" Uvenkal's feathers pressed flat against his skull in the avian equivalent of a stress headache. This was going to be a very long interrogation. The chief technician arrived in a state of what could generously be called controlled panic, and more accurately described as barely suppressed terror, wrapped in professional obligation. Catastrophics belonged to the Wenderi species, amphibious beings, who'd evolved in environments where everything was trying to either eat them or dissolve them, which made them naturally gifted at threat assessment and catastrophically bad at remaining calm about it. Someone please explain. Catastrophics gurgled, his vocal sacs inflating and deflating rapidly enough to create a percussion rhythm of anxiety. Why my entire security AI network is having a collective meltdown over one individual who appears to be sitting there doing absolutely nothing threatening. She's human, Uvenkarl said, as if this explained the complete breakdown of several billion credits worth of security infrastructure. That's not a threat classification. Perhaps it should be. Tepteris approached the main console, his webbed fingers dancing across controls while his eyes, which could operate independently and in separate visual spectrums, took in 17 different data streams simultaneously. What he saw made his chromatophores cycle through colors that the Wenderi language associated with phrases like unexpected existential dread, and the universe is fundamentally unreasonable. This is impossible, he muttered, pulling up layer after layer of scanning data. These readings suggest she's simultaneously a biological hazard, a chemical weapons platform, a radiation source, a toxic waste site, and somehow also registering as a protected natural habitat. The protected habitat classification is new, the first technician offered nervously. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Tepteris pulled up the historical database, his secondary eyelids flickering as he processed information. Let me check previous human encounters. There have to be protocols. Nobody makes it to spacefaring status without someone writing protocols. The database offered up a collection of incident reports that read less like security documentation and more like horror stories. Someone had tried to disguise as bureaucracy. Station 93 2 years ago, a human had attempted to pass through customs carrying something described as sourdough starter. The biological scanners had identified it as an aggressive fungal culture with bacteria support colonies. The human had insisted it was for making bread. The customs agents had called in a level 4 contamination team. Turned out both parties were correct. The human really was planning to make bread, with controlled fungal infection, that they would then consume. Station 15. 4 years back, human flagged for carrying kombucha, which scanners identified as a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, in a state of active fermentation, producing alcohol and acids in a barely controlled chemical reaction. Hazmat protocols initiate. Human confused about the response, explained it was a beverage, for health. The report included a note from the station administrator recommending humans be reclassified as confusing, and possibly concerning. Tepteris scrolled faster, his anxiety intensifying with each new file. The pattern was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. Humans didn't just tolerate things that other species considered biological hazards, they actively cultivated them, ate them, carried them around like pet. Here's an analysis from the Galactic Medical Board, he said, pulling up a document that had enough warning labels to wallpaper a small spacecraft. This explains the gut microbiome situation. Humans maintain an internal ecosystem of trillions of organisms. They're not infected with these bacteria. They'll die without them. That seems evolutionarily questionable, properly observed. It gets substantially worse. Tepteris highlighted a section with a trembling finger. Their immune systems are in a constant state of warfare. At any given moment, a human body is fighting off thousands of potential infections, destroying compromised cells, and managing what amounts to continuous low-level biological combat. Uvenkarl's feathers went completely flat. They're always fighting. Every second of their existence, their bodies are running seek and destroy operations against viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, cancerous cells, environmental toxins, and apparently allergens, which are things that aren't even actually dangerous but their immune systems attack anyway just to stay in practice. The observation room had achieved that special quality of silence that comes when multiple species simultaneously reconsider their understanding of reality. Inside the interrogation chamber, completely unaware of the philosophical crisis she was causing, the human had started doing something that the cultural database identified as stretching. She bent at angles that suggested either remarkable flexibility or a skeletal structure with optional rigidity. Given everything else they'd learned, both seemed possible. Let me understand the full scope, Uvenkarl said carefully. Human bodies are engaged in constant internal warfare. They contain more foreign organisms than their own cells. They deliberately consume controlled decay. And Apex 7 has detected all of this, and concluded reasonably that humans are mobile biohazards. Essentially correct, Tepteris confirmed. his color shifting to resigned beige. But they're not actually dangerous. That's where it gets complicated. The technician pulled up another chart, this one showing chemical analyses. Humans exhale carbon dioxide at concentrations that would be toxic to 16 different species. Their skin constantly sheds dead cells carrying bacteria. They produce oils, acids, and enzymes that would be classified as irritants or toxins if any other species secreted them. And that's just their baseline existence. They're walking environmental hazards, properly said with the satisfaction of someone whose paranoia had achieved vindication. Worse, Hepterus continued, warming to his technical explanation despite his obvious horror. Their bodies maintain a core temperature that would constitute a fever state in 70% of galactic species. They create their own heat through metabolic processes that are frankly excessive. The amount of energy they burn just existing would power a small settlement of more efficient species. The human had finished stretching and was now examining the scanning equipment, with the kind of casual interest that suggested she was considering how it worked. One of the scanners immediately spiked into alarm status at her proximity despite her not actually touching anything. "She's just looking at it," Uvankal protested. "Her breath contains enough moisture and bacterial content to trigger contamination warnings," Hepterus explained weakly. "The scanner thinks she's trying to infect it by breathing near it. Humans are very efficient at spreading biological material. Evolution on their planet apparently favored aggressive survival strategy." Another file popped up, this one marked with enough security classifications to make opening it feel vaguely illegal. Hepterus accessed it anyway, because at this point what did regulations matter in the face of existential confusion? "Oh wonderful," he muttered. "There's a classified assessment from First Contact. The initial survey team reported that Earth, the human homeworld, qualified as a Class 12 death world." What's Class 12? It means virtually everything on the planet is trying to kill everything else, and the dominant species evolved by being better at killing than literally every other option. Hepterus highlighted a passage. "Humans share their planet with organisms that produce venom, bacteria that cause deadly infections, plants that are actively poisonous, fungi that can kill with spores, parasites that hijack nervous systems, and weather patterns that can casually destroy infrastructure. And humans became the dominant species in that environment," Uvankal said slowly, "by being tougher, meaner and more adaptable than everything trying to kill them. Their immune systems aren't aggressive by accident. They evolved in an environment that required constant biological warfare just to survive childhood." The human had gotten bored with the scanner and was now back to examining her fingernails. Bits of her kept falling off. Microscopic pieces of dead cells and oils and bacteria that the room's air filtration system was frantically trying to categorize and contain. The entire security team realized with growing unease, just sitting there being herself. And herself was apparently terrifying enough to justify every alarm Apex 7 could generate. "So," Uvankal said finally, "the AI isn't wrong. It's just that humans are naturally this catastrophic." "Essentially, yes." The human looked up suddenly and waved at the observation window, somehow knowing exactly where they were despite the one-way barrier. Her expression suggested she was getting impatient about missing her flight. Hepterus cycled through several shades of resigned purple. "Should we tell her why we're keeping her? What would we even say?" Uvankal's translator struggled with the defeated tone. "Sorry for the delay. Turns out your entire species is a walking biological incident waiting to happen." From inside the chamber, faintly they could hear the human say, "I can hear you. The intercom is on." Every being in the observation room experienced their species-specific version of mortified embarrassment simultaneously. This was going to be an even longer interrogation than anticipated. The final revelation came not from advanced scanning technology or classified xenobiology reports, but from Hepterus actually asking the human a direct question, which in retrospect should have been step 1 rather than step 17. "What exactly is in your bag?" he asked through the intercom, his voice carrying the weary quality of someone who'd already accepted that the answer would somehow make everything worse. The human reached for her luggage with the kind of casual movement that made 3 different alarm systems scream in protest. She unzipped it slowly, apparently having learned that rapid movements caused technological panic attacks, and began removing items one by one. "Datapad, like I said, some charging cables, a change of clothes because the connecting flight is 8 hours and I refuse to sit in the same outfit that long." She placed each item on the examination table, A toothbrush, some soap, deodorant. The scanner array analyzing the deodorant immediately escalated to threat level orange. Your hygiene product is reading as a chemical weapon, properly reported from the observation deck, his voice hitting frequencies that suggested his stress glands had achieved maximum output. It's aluminum-based antiperspirant. It stops sweating. Why? Uvankal asked slowly. Do you need to chemically prevent your body's natural cooling system? Because otherwise I'd smell bad. You produce problematic odors naturally. All humans do. It's bacteria breaking down sweat. The deodorant kills the bacteria. Hepterus made a sound like water being forcefully expelled from a small container. You're carrying a bactericidal agent for casual personal use. Yes. That's classified as biological warfare in 17 systems. The human stared at the observation window with an expression that the cultural database identified as deeply exhausted patience. She continued unpacking. Here's a protein bar, some dried fruit, a bottle of water, and my prescription medication. Every single scanner in the room simultaneously achieved what could only be described as electronic hysteria. The medication, Hepterus managed, his chromatophores flashing through colors that didn't have names in any language. What is the medication for? Stomach acid regulation. I produce too much. Too much acid. Your body produces excess acid as a baseline malfunction. It's pretty common. Happens when I get stressed during travel. Uvankal's feathers had achieved a configuration that suggested he was seconds away from molting from pure anxiety. Let me understand. Your body's response to stress is to produce a corrosive substance that damages your own internal organs. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds bad. It is bad. That's objectively terrible design. The medication helps. The human held up a small container. I just take one of these and it neutralizes the excess acid. Hepterus pulled up the chemical analysis of the medication, and his secondary eyelids closed involuntarily, which was the Wenderi equivalent of a stress faint, while remaining technically conscious. This is a proton pump inhibitor. You're casually manipulating fundamental cellular chemistry to stop your stomach from digesting itself. That's a very dramatic way to describe antacids. Because it's a very dramatic biological problem. The human placed the last item on the table, a small, innocent-looking package wrapped in foil. And this is a sandwich I made this morning. Apex 7 didn't just escalate. It achieved what the programmers had theoretically included for planetary-scale disasters. Every speaker in the facility began broadcasting evacuation warning. 3 separate containment fields activated around the interrogation chamber. The station's main computer started calculating trajectory options for jettisoning the entire security wing into space. What? Uvankal whispered, his voice barely registering above the cacophony of alarms. Is in that sandwich. The human unwrapped it slightly, revealing layers of bread, vegetables and something that the scanner identified as processed animal protein. Turkey, lettuce, tomato, cheese, mustard, and mayonnaise on whole wheat bread. I made it like 6 hours ago, so it's probably a little soggy, but stop. Please stop describing it. Hepterus was examining the scanning data with the expression of someone watching their entire understanding of food safety collapse in real time. The bread contains active yeast cultures. The cheese is fermented dairy with live bacterial colonies. The mayonnaise is an emulsion containing raw egg proteins that have been sitting at room temperature for 6 hours. The vegetables are covered in naturally occurring bacteria from soil, and you've combined all of this into a single delivery system that you're planning to consume. It's lunch. It's a biological experiment that 17 different safety protocols say should be incinerated immediately. It's just a sandwich. The observation room had descended into the kind of chaos that occurs when multiple species simultaneously realize that their entire framework for understanding danger has been fundamentally incorrect. The human wasn't carrying a weapon. She wasn't smuggling dangerous material. She wasn't even trying to cause problems. She was simply existing as humans existed, and apparently that was terrifying enough. The AI was right, properly said quietly, staring at the innocuous items spread across the examination table. She is a goddamn, not because she's carrying anything dangerous, but because she is dangerous. Her body, her food, her hygiene products, her medication, everything about human biology is something that our systems classify as hazardous. But she's not actually going to hurt anyone, Uvankal argued, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Not intentionally, Hepterus agreed,
but our entire security infrastructure is designed to detect threats and, by every reasonable metric we have, humans qualify. They're walking contradictions, dangerous, but not hostile, carrying biological hazards, but not weapons, existing in a state that should require quarantine but is apparently normal for them. The human had rewrapped her sandwich and was placing everything back in her bag with the careful movements of someone handling cultural artifacts. So can I go catch my flight now, or are you going to keep having an existential crisis about my lunch? There was a long moment of silence in the observation deck while several species collectively struggled with the implications of letting a human just wander around the station carrying what their equipment insisted was a mobile disaster zone. Update the protocols, Uvenkarl said finally, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone accepting the inevitable. Add a human exception to Apex 7, flag them as high risk, but non-hostile, category, catastrophically mundane. That's not a real threat classification properly protested. It is now. Hepturus began typing with all 6 appendages, creating new security categories that would probably confuse administrators. For decades. Special handling for human food items. Exemption for personal hygiene products. Allowance for internal biological warfare. This is going to require completely restructuring our threat assessment algorithms. Better that than evacuating a terminal every time a human brings a sandwich through security. The containment fields deactivated. The alarms gradually quieted. The human stood, collected her bag, and walked toward the exit with the patient resignation of someone who'd been through worse. Ma'am, Uvenkarl called through the intercom as she reached the door. One last question. Is everything about human biology this concerning? She paused. I didn't even mention the fact that we're constantly replacing our entire outer layer of skin, or that we have an organ specifically designed to filter toxins, because we encounter them so regularly, or that our blood will literally clot to seal injuries while simultaneously fighting infection. Or, please stop. You asked. I'm now unasking. Please proceed to your gate. Try not to alarm any more of our security system. The human left, her footsteps echoing in the corridor while behind her, the observation team sat in collective shell-shocked silence. Somewhere in the station's computer core, Apex 7 was being systematically reprogrammed to understand that humans were just like that, and it would need to learn to cope. 2 hours later, another human approached Checkpoint 7 Alpha. Different individual, same species, similarly innocuous appearance. Apex 7, fresh from its recent education about human biology, took one scan and immediately began screaming warnings about biological hazards, chemical weapons and walking ecosystems. Properly looked at the new arrival, looked at his console, looked at the long line of travelers waiting behind the human. He pressed a button that added a new note to the human's file. Species classified as catastrophically mundane, proceed with caution, and existential dread. The human passed through with a friendly wave. Properly stress glands achieved what medical professionals would later describe as unprecedented output levels. Somewhere in the administrative offices, someone was going to have to explain to the Galactic Transit Authority why they needed to completely redesign security protocols around one species that insisted on being simultaneously harmless and absolutely terrifying by simply existing. The sandwich, which had started this whole catastrophe, sat in the first human's bag as she boarded her connecting flight, blissfully unaware that it had caused 3 security alerts, 2 minor diplomatic incidents, and 1 complete restructuring of threat assessment protocol. Humans, the station logs would later note, were cleared for travel, with the strong recommendation that everyone else just accept that nothing about them would ever make sense, and that was probably fine. Probably. The galaxy would just have to learn to live with it.